Boxing philosophy is about understanding, in a specific sense, understanding the motion in the ring. And it's about questions. For example, many years ago, Socrates revolutionized understanding simply by asking questions. And we ask questions, but in the boxing context, like, who has the best jab in boxing? Is it Larry Holmes? Is it Lennox Lewis? Who has the best left hook to the body? And who is the best counterpuncher? And who has the best boxing IQ? Because boxing is about psychology, it's about contracts, it's about business, it's about passion, and ultimately it's about understanding the multifarious layers within the boxing context. So who were the best boxers in 2025? Who were the kings of the ring? 2025 was a good year for boxing. Great fights, great entertainment, and great business. But boxing is a sweet science. So who were the masters, the boxing masters of 2025? So when it comes to, the best boxers of 2025, I think you've got to start with Crawford. You've got to start with Bud Crawford. And the reason for that is that his fight against Canelo had a cultural impact. And it's important to recognize the currency of cultural impact. So when we think of fights that have a cultural impact, I think of Evander Holyfield, Mike Tyson, the first fight and the second fight. And the reason for the cultural impact there was they were both huge brands. You had the brand of Mike Tyson, you had the brand of Evander Holyfield. They were both huge brands. Then you had the narrative bias of the underdog, Evander Holyfield. And then you had this narrative bias of good and evil that was projected by the media. I'm not saying either of them are good or evil, but you had this storyline, and then you had a great fight. So that's a fight that has cultural impact. People still remember that fight, and particularly the second fight, they remember it, perhaps for the wrong reasons, but it had a significant cultural impact, and they were both elite level fighters, of course. If you go further back, you have the Muhammad Ali George Foreman fight. You had, that event was in Africa, and you had the narrative of the great Muhammad Ali making a comeback, fighting the highly favored George Foreman, who was coming off two spectacular wins against Joe Frazier and Ken Norton. I believe both of them were second round knockouts. So you had the dominant champion against the former great champion, and this was a cultural impact. This had significant cultural impact because of the brands, because of how dominant a champion George Foreman was, and because of how likable a personality Muhammad Ali was. But also you had the marketability, but then you had a great fight and a great outcome. And you had the rope-a-dope, which is language that people still use today. Huge cultural impact. So cultural impact is important. And when you had the Crawford Canelo, it had massive cultural impact. Why? Crawford has the American market. Canelo has like every market. He's a massive brand, international brand, like just so well known to the general fans and to the American fans. You have Canelo, who's a massive entity. You have Crawford, who's a respectable entity. Then you have the challenge of the fight, because Crawford is elite, Canelo is elite, but Crawford is coming up 2 weight classes. So he's daring to be great. And even though you may not have got like the greatest fight of all time with loads of drama, the impact of the fight was you had the whole Netflix coverage. So you had, the accessibility of the fight, and 40 million people watched the fight. So that in itself shows the cultural impact. And those 40 million people witnessed the technical dominance of Crawford, which was unexpected considering that he was coming up 2 weight divisions. So, Crawford was amazing in this fight, whether it was the footwork, the punch selection, controlling the distance, and actually going southpaw in the whole fight, which was significant. Why was it significant? Because Canelo was known for having a dangerous right hand, and most people reckon that southpaws are particularly susceptible to the right hand. But despite this, Crawford remained in that position. He nullified the right hand. He nullified that left hook to the body that Canelo's known for. And I would say that he dominated the fight. It was a technical masterpiece, and it was a moment that was appreciated by boxing fans. It was a moment that was appreciated by the casual fans. It had a huge cultural impact, and it was a great, great performance. And therefore, because of that huge event and the nature of the event, you've got to put Crawford down as one of the best boxers of 2025. Another fighter you have to put up there for one of the best boxers in 2025 is Bivol. And I feel like people have been really silent on Bivol. When people speak about the best boxers of 2025, Bivol is not being mentioned, which is incredible. However, what made Bivol such an elite operator and such an elite force at 2025 was the elite challenge presented by Beterbiev. Beterbiev was a power punching monster. The reference to that, the Callum Smith fight, you had the Anthony Yard fight, and really any fight of Beterbiev. Any fight that Beterbiev engaged in, he knocked his opponents out. And he was a type of fighter that he was generating power from even the short punches would hurt you. And he was such a massive force. And this fight didn't have the same cultural impact as, say, a Canelo and a Crawford, but it did have an impact for the boxing fans. The boxing fans, the people that know boxing, they really, really wanted this fight. They were really anticipating this rematch. And again, what made this rematch so good and what makes Bivol a great fighter in 2025 was obviously his brilliance, but obviously the enormity of the challenge that was presented in Beterbiev. So you have to give Beterbiev credit, because if he's not that elite force, then this fight doesn't have that significance. And for me, this fight had that magical moment where in the first half of the fight, Beterbiev looked like he was starting to take control, but then in the second half of the fight, Bivol just went into a different mode. He went into a different dimension. And that's why I say, or I've said historically, that when this fight happened, in that second half of the fight, Bivol went into Matrix mode. It's almost like he just transcended, because he just went to another. Often you'll find that great fighters have gears. They can go to gear 1, gear 2, gear 3, gear 4. And Bivol showed that he had other gears that we didn't even know he had. Maybe he didn't even know he had it in him. But he definitely, from a boxing standpoint, he transcended. And this, for me, the narrative bias here was the concept of how technical mastery controls elite level violence. So you have to look at Bivol and really give him his credit, because he was technically so superb in that fight. And also, because obviously we can acknowledge the technical masterpiece, but also it's important to acknowledge the positive psychology that Bivol had. Every fighter before Bivol had crumbled at some point to Beterbiev. So Bivol not only was technically elite, his psychology was elite, his courage was elite, his bravery was elite. He refused to give ground. Yes, he moved around the ring. Yes, he used footwork. Yes, he used the jab. Yes, he used the feints. But there were times when he would just punch through the phases. So he'd throw like a 1, 2, 3, then a 1 to the body, a 2 to the head, and then a 3, and then he would come back and do it again. He would punch through the phases. He didn't fear the reputation of Beterbiev. And, yes, he fought smart, but there were times of character and times of courage and times of real perseverance. So it was technically an elite performance, but from a psychological perspective, it was also an elite performance. And my last pick is Naoya Inoue, who I've been speaking about a lot on this channel. With Naoya Inoue, there's so much to love. I love the punch creativity. I love the 6 to 7, 8 punch combinations. I love the counter punching. I love the great body punching, the way he sets up that left hook to the body. And he has a great one too that has a variation. Sometimes he throws it at the target, sometimes he throws it through the target. And I love his perseverance. He's had to get up from the floor, and it's like when you knock him down, he just comes back even stronger. I love the speed, I love the power, I love the dominance. And I believe he had 4 consecutive victories in 2025. And now some may say that he hasn't had the same cultural impact. And there's a slight misstep to that. That premise isn't entirely true, because his cultural impact in Japan is absolutely huge from what I'm told. So yes, maybe not the cultural impact in the world, but he definitely has a significant cultural impact in Japan, and that has been growing and growing exponentially with each and every victory. So of course he didn't have the elite competition. So say like Crawford had Canelo, so Canelo was elite competition. Bivol had Butterbiev was elite competition. So Naoya Inoue didn't have the elite competition. He didn't have that massive breakthrough moment, but he has had that consistency, and he has had these great performances. So the opposition may not have been elite, but his performances have been elite. And also with the exposure, the exposure on DAZN and things of that nature, and the virality of some of his fights, there is, yes, his major backing is in Japan. Obviously his major influence is Japan, but there is some transference there with regards to people in America and Britain watching. And how can you not be impressed? How can you not be impressed with Naoya Inoue? What's there not to like? And he may be number 1 at the moment. And with regards to, the boxer of the significant impact, if we talk about elite competition, then we wouldn't call him number 1. But if we talk about elite performances and the consistency of having 4 performances, I think Usyk only had 1 fight, Bivol only had 1 fight. Yes, they were elite performances, and in the Crawford category, it was a massive cultural event. But consistency, you've got to go Naoya Inoue. So that's my take on the best boxers of 2025. I would love to hear your perspective. Do you agree with my assertions, or do you think I missed someone out? Like I said, share your perspective in the comments, and hopefully 2026 will be another great year for boxing. So Holly Holmes has a co-main event, or is the co-main event, versus Stephanie Hahn. Now, when we speak about Holly Holmes, it's important to recognize that she was a great female boxer. She was a multiple world champion and had a lot of credibility in the boxing space. And you could argue quite convincingly that she's a top 10 female boxer of all time. Now, my reflection or my memories of Holly Holm is when she fought Ronda Rousey. Now, it's important to remember that Ronda Rousey in the UFC, now this was a UFC fight, and it was a title fight, and Ronda Rousey was seen as an elite champion. She was seen as a dominant champion. And I remember she was beating her opponents primarily with arm bars. So she was like breaking people's arms, and she was feared. And I remember wanting Holly Holmes to win the fight so badly. I really wanted Holly Holmes to win because I knew about her boxing background, and I was really hoping for a victory, hoping that she could pull it off. And I remember people just underestimating her and not really taking into account her boxing ability, which turned out to be significant. And the funny thing about that fight was the cultural impact of that victory. That victory had a significant cultural impact. And it was almost like that UFC victory that made her a champion had casual fans explore her boxing history. Now, the reason why maybe a lot of people didn't know that Holly Holmes was a female boxing champion and a great boxing champion was that female boxing at the time didn't have the limelight that it has now. So that's an important distinction to make. But that Ronda Rousey victory for me I was so happy for her that she had that victory. So now we approach a stage where she's not in the UFC anymore, and now she's in the later stages of her boxing career. So I was watching one of the what's it called, the documentaries that was documenting her camp. And what I would say is, obviously a boxer is going to talk positively in camp. I mean, it's very important to have a positive psychology. So even if they're not having a good camp, they're not going to admit it pre-fight. But she did look very strong in her camp. She was quite muscular and really, really strong. So as I've stated, Holly Holm looks really strong in camp. She looks physically very strong. And she wasn't known in her prime as a power puncher, but she looks like she's carrying more power now. And her trainer made reference to that now she's more powerful. So it's going to be interesting to see if the visual imagery of her looking stronger translates to actual greater power punching in the ring. Now, as I've stated, Holly Holm was a significant force in female boxing when there was less interest in female boxing, when there was less interest in female boxing by casual fans, and let's be honest, by boxing fans. However, the MVP machine, that production company, is putting a lot of attention onto female boxing. You could make an argument, and I think it would be quite a compelling argument, that Jake Paul's greatest contribution to boxing is the marketing of female boxing. And an example of this is because the Serrano and Katie Taylor fight was, I believe it was the supporting main event to the Mike Tyson-Jake Paul fight, that meant 60 million people potentially watched that fight. So they are putting massive attention on female boxing. And that can only be a good thing, because that gives an opportunity to pique interest not only within the boxing circles, but also within the casual boxing fan circles, and also within just casual fans in general. It will allow female boxers to make more money, to have more visibility, to build their brands. And by building their brands, they can create moments that can interest the public. And that's significant, and that's what female boxing needs if it's going to continue to prosper. So I would argue that female boxing needs more culturally defining moments. It needs big, massive headlining events. And Holly Holm is not only a credible brand because of her boxing background and her UFC championship status, but she also has cultural significance because of the Ronda Rousey fight. Again, it's important to highlight that if you have a significant cultural moment, it can be predicated on many things. But in that fight, the reason why it was such a significant cultural moment was because Ronda Rousey was seen as an elite champion. Anyway, what about her opponent? Well, her opponent, Holly Holm's opponent, Stephanie Hahn, is a champion. She's holding the WBA title. Now, I had a brief look at her fights. Looks like what she does, she keeps her left hand moving, so she uses it as a feint. Looks like her main preference is to punch straight. And she also has a style where she tries to walk you in onto the punches, and she likes to move from side to side as opposed to moving forward. Also in the fight that I watched, she actually came back from a first round knockdown. So that shows composure and that shows heart. However, it was a flash knockdown. It wasn't like a knockdown where she was like really badly hurt. She was more knocked off balance, but still she showed composure to come back. She isn't known for her power, so she's not a massive power puncher, but she is a champion. She does have experience. However, look, from an outsider looking in, it looks like that Holly Holm has the edge in power and will have the edge in experience. And I think she'll have a significant edge in experience because she's been a multiple champion at the boxing level, but also she had huge fights, particularly on the UFC stage. Now, I know UFC isn't boxing, but she's fought at the high level on the big stages in the UFC and in the big stages in boxing. Yes, it was a little bit different because when she was boxing, there wasn't as much as an emphasis on female boxing at the time, but she has experience under the bright lights, so I will give her an edge in that. Also, her southpaw style gives her a slight edge as well. However, the caveat to that is obviously a champion is not going to surrender their belt easily, so there will be resistance. The psychology of a champion, she's going to want to keep that belt. And Holly Holm's age of 44 it could be a significant factor. But this should be an entertaining fight. It will probably be a fight that will go the distance, unless, if Holly Holm has developed this new power, maybe that could be a factor later in the fight. But I think looking at it from side to side, you'd give Holly Holmes a slight edge, and it would be great to see her capture one of the titles and have, not only just get a title, but then, be able to create some great cultural moments in boxing, because she definitely deserves it. I also wanted to mention that Serrano is fighting as well, and she's actually headlining the event. Serrano is really important to female boxing because she has built her brand under MVP Promotions. She has great credibility. She has provided elite entertainment. Her fights with Katie Taylor were top draw. They had good marketing, but they also had, it wasn't just a great marketed event. It was actually a great fight. They had a sequence of fights. They had a trilogy. So she's provided the entertainment, and she has made good money. So she's definitely an advocate for female boxing. So that should be an interesting fight. I think it's really important, and I just want to re-emphasize this. It's important that female boxing creates cultural moments. And when I say cultural moments, you're thinking about, the Evander Holyfield versus Tyson. That was a cultural moment. Recently, Crawford versus Canelo. That was a massive cultural moment. So to me, cultural moments is about building brands. It's about telling stories. And then it's about having great fights. You have to have all of those elements primarily. And sometimes I actually think to myself, imagine if Chrissy Martin was fighting today. She would have been a bigger star. And for reference, check out Chrissy Martin's knockout on the Mike Tyson Holyfield undercard. She was really powerful. She had something that was rare, which was that knockout power, and she was ruthless. But she would be a massive star today. But the important point here is that within female boxing, there needs to be harnessing more stars, and we need more significant fights. And within those fights, we need those magical moments. And that can stimulate the boxing fans and stimulate the casual fans. And that's important if there's going to be an evolution of female boxing. So the chapter of MVP and female boxing is a very important one. So Usyk has been dominant. 2 wins over Anthony Joshua, 2 wins over Tyson Fury, and 2 wins over Daniel Dubois. And that last performance, absolutely sensational. He's cleared out the era's biggest names with speed, craft, and cold control. So what's left? Who can really test him now? Let's pick 3 opponents who bring danger and a real challenge in the ring. Okay, so the first opponent that I think can bring a major challenge to Usyk is Caballero. So let's explain why. And in explaining why, let's go through his credentials. So one of the fights that was significant for Caballero was against Makhmudov. Now at the time, Makhmudov was undefeated. He was an undefeated fighter, and he was a power puncher, and he had size. So in that fight, what you found, I think it was in round 1, he was moving on the outside, limiting the punch opportunities for Makhmudov, limiting his chances to throw the right hand. But then in round 2 and round 3 and round 4, he got on the inside and he used really effective body punching. And one of the punch selections that he likes is similar to Canelo, because he likes to throw the right uppercut to the head and the left hook to the body. And he'll repeat that sequence. And in that fight, he showed the ability to make the transition from his style in round 1 to round 2, round 3, round 4. But he also showed effective pressure, because once he started applying the pressure, Makhmudov was unable to cope with that pressure, and he broke him down. And he broke him down with a work rate. He nullified getting hit with anything truly significant, and that was a good performance. Then the next reference point for Caballero being a good challenger to Usyk is the Frank Sanchez fight. Now, of course, these fighters currently are not close to Usyk's level. But again, with the Frank Sanchez, I believe at the time he was undefeated. Now, there is a bit of context with the Frank Sanchez fight, and that was that he was wearing, I believe it was a brace on his knee. So I believe there may have been an injury that may have affected his mobility. So it's important to factor that in. However, you can only fight what's in front of you. And Caballero, he used effective pressure. And he outpunched Sanchez. This is a common theme. And he was able to negate most of the counters. Now, this is important because Sanchez is a good counterpuncher. But even though he's a good counterpuncher, Caballero had the ring intelligence to nullify those counterpunches. And again, he showed nice combinations. I believe he did it was like a left hook to the head, right hook to the body, left hook to the head. And then he had like a left hook to the head, right hook to the body, and then an overhand right to the head. So he's got these nice combinations. He's got punch creativity, he's got ring IQ, he's able to implement a plan effectively, he's able to avoid punches. And then the final exhibit to kind of say, this person would give Usyk a good fight is the Zhilei Zhang performance. Now remember, at the time, Zhilei Zhang had 2 wins over Joe Joyce, which was significant because Joe Joyce was on a roll at the time. 2 knockout wins against Joe Joyce. So, and then he had the win over Wilder. So this was, this was a Zhang that was coming to win. Now, Zhang did have the loss to Parker. It's important to factor that in. But Zhang is a southpaw. He isn't a fast fighter, but he's a strong fighter. Very strong, and he's a good counterpuncher. And he can keep you at range with his punches, and he can, he really has knockout power. But despite this, he wore Zhang down with a heavy output, and again with those sickening body shots. He really wore Zhang down. He was able to negate most of the counters. He did go down in that fight, but that's the heart check because he went down and he got straight back up. So when we talk about the difficulty Caballero presents, I think one of the difficulties he presents to Usyk is that he has a punch output that presents a problem because his punch output is more like a cruiserweight than a heavyweight. And this will be something that Usyk used to deal with as a cruiserweight champion, but it would be new to him in the current day because he would be dealing with the punch outputs of the Tyson Furies, Daniel Dubois, Anthony Joshua, etc. So his punch output is a problem. And his ability to deal with counters is a problem. Now that's an important thing because Usyk was a deadly counterpuncher in the Daniel Dubois rematch. So he presents some problems there. And he has shown some evidence of dealing with southpaws effectively, and I'm mainly referring to Zhang. Now obviously Zhilei Zhang is different to Usyk, but it does give us a reference point that he can handle that southpaw position. So the southpaw position in itself won't give him problems. Obviously, Usyk's creativity and punch selection and accuracy will. Also, his punch creativity creates a problem. And again, the punch creativity Caballero will present to the table will be probably different to anything he's faced in the heavyweight division. I think the fighter that had the most punch creativity that he dealt with was probably the Tyson Fury. In the first Tyson Fury fight, there were parts of that fight where Tyson Fury was exceptional. So in terms of difficulty level, this is a difficult fight. But here's the problem, and this is why I believe the fight is problematic and probably won't happen. Caballero presents danger, but he does not have the brand. Yes, he's had exposure in fights, but he doesn't have, say, the brand of a Wilder, the brand of a Tyson Fury. His brand doesn't make this fight appetizing to the casual fan. The boxing fans, the people that know boxing, know this could potentially be a difficult fight, but his branding isn't there, I think. And this is important to realize that with fights, branding is so important. It's your brand. Look at Mike Tyson. He came back at 58, and because of his brand that was built over 3 decades, the fight against Jake Paul was watched by 60 million households. So Caballero has the fighting IQ, he has the punch creativity, Seems like he has the punch resistance, but the issue is the brand. But he would present a serious test. So the second opponent to me would be Fabio Wardley. Now, Fabio Wardley has shown the ability to land knockout punches. He has knockout power. But the question before the Joseph Parker fight, a former world champion, was, does he have knockout power on a championship level? Or can he land knockout punches on a fighter that has championship caliber? And he showed in that fight that he can do that. He set traps. I think he set a trap in round 2, and that enabled him to walk Joseph Parker onto the right hand. And the thing is with Fabio Wardley is that he punches through the target. Yes, there's a risk of getting counterpunched, but also punching through the target as a power puncher heightens the ability to score the knockout. So you're kind of rolling the dice when you're punching through the target, particularly against Usyk, who is a great counterpuncher. But Wardley is a knockout artist, and he sets up traps. And he showed that against Joseph Parker, and he showed that against Justice Hooney, who I think is a good boxer, and was outboxing Fabio Wardley. But Fabio Wardley kept his composure and walked him into the right hand, and that's all she wrote. So when we talk about the difficulty of this fight for Usyk, this is a difficult one, because I would say he probably has a better knockout chance than Wilder. How could that be so if Wilder's one of the heaviest punchers of all time? I think he has a better knockout opportunity than Wilder, because Wilder currently is probably not the most confident fighter, because he's coming off the losses to Tyson Fury, that trilogy that would have taken a lot out of him, and he's coming off the loss to Joseph Parker and Zhilei Zhang. So I think, in theory, perhaps Deontay Wilder's the hardest puncher, or the harder puncher, but I'm not sure if he has the confidence and the ring IQ, respectively, to present the same danger as Fabio Wardley. In contrast, Fabio Wardley has the confidence of an undefeated fighter, so he has that positive psychology. He punches through the target, he sets traps, and he keeps setting traps even when he's getting beaten up. He doesn't get discouraged, he just keeps trying and trying. So I think his knockout opportunity, I think the word significant is probably too big of a word, but Usyk will have to be switched on for 12 rounds. Also, there's another element here. Wardley does try to land his jab a lot, and this potentially can create backhand opportunities. He does use his jab. He depends on his jab. So again, the jab and the feints and his ability to set traps, it gives him a chance. He also has a good team, so he'll come in with an elite strategy. So again, that gives him a chance. But I think the most likely outcome, even though this would be a difficult prospect for Usyk, the most likely outcome is that he could be outpointed and even stopped late in the fight. Because if Usyk is able to time those punches through the target and land the counter left, then Fabio Wardley will be in trouble. And let's not forget, in the Daniel Dubois rematch, Usyk is now punching with more authority and he's coming in heavier. And that would spell great danger for Fabio Wardley. But he does have a chance. Now, with regards to branding, Fabio Wardley has a few things going for him. He's got a British presence, which is growing exponentially, so that's good. His knockout of Frazier Clark in the rematch went viral, so there was the virality of that knockout. My assumption is that his presence is limited in the USA. So you've got the virality of Britain, or you've got the British presence, then the virality of that knockout against Frazier Clark, but then a limited visibility in America. So the point here is that he would need to probably develop his brand, which, 2 fights in America, 2 sensational knockouts, and then his brand will be right there. And clearly, I think in making the Usyk fight, you need to not only present the difficulty, but you also have to have, it has to make sense with regards to cultural impact and financial impact. And that's probably why the Deontay fight is being negotiated. Now, my third and final opponent would be Moses Atama. Now, of course, with Moses Atama, his most impressive performance was against Dillian Whyte. In that fight, he was fast and accurate. His jab was powerful. Obviously, he comes out in the southpaw position, and he showed in that fight that his backhand is dangerous and he can finish an experienced fighter. So that was his best opponent. However, I think ability-wise, it's like Moses Atama has elite ability, but he has very low-level experience, and that could be significant. However, he presents, with regards to ability, he probably presents the biggest danger because he seems to have it all. So when we talk about difficulty, again, there's two major categories here. When we talk about strengths, southpaw stance. So Usyk doesn't have that advantage because they both fight from the southpaw stance. So typically, a southpaw stance will have an advantage over an orthodox fighter because southpaws have experience fighting orthodox fighters, but orthodox fighters don't have experience fighting southpaws. So he has that going for him. He has a great team, Ben Davidson, so he'll have a very good team, which would mean great camp. There's a big investment, so they'll put money into the team. You have the best strength and conditioning, great sparring partners, etc. Remember, the boxing environment is so important to harness a great fighter. His speed and reflexes appear to be elite. He has great patience, great confidence. So all these things are going for him. And a lot of people are seeing him as the next star, and he may be that. But his lack of experience at the elite level would be concerning. So at the time of writing, you would have to favor Usyk with, the second half of the fight, serious dominance. And the challenge, I guess, would be, could Moses destroy Usyk within the first half of the fight, which it's even hard to even comprehend that. But the speed, the reflexes, the southpaw stance, and the elite level ability, they present a unique challenge. And like I said, if Moses had the experience, then this would be a completely different situation. So it's a high-level difficulty, but the experience is a very, very significant factor, and that cannot be overlooked. However, 2 or 3 fights against significant opposition, and then the experience will change. Still, it will be overwhelmingly in Usyk's favor, but it's very important that Moses Atama doesn't just learn the technical elements of the craft. It's important that he gets experience in front of large crowds and against tougher opposition. With regards to his brand is strong. I think there's a lot of investment and a lot of visibility with regards to Moses Atama, and he's gaining traction in Britain. There probably is a lack of visibility in America, but again, 1 to 2 performances against American oppositions that's sensational could change that. A viral knockout could change that. He does have a fan-friendly style. He's an exciting fighter. However, some may say that he has a lack of charisma, which sounds a bit harsh, but some may say that he doesn't have the charisma of certain fighters. Think of like a Floyd Mayweather. So when we think about these fights, when we think about those 3 opponents, there is a difficulty level. But then I guess from Usyk's perspective, you have to think of, is the risk worth it? And remember, Usyk's decision is his decision, but it's probably heavily influenced by the people around him, because there are people, advisors, that are looking or should be looking in his best interest. And I guess there's a few questions to ask here. Is it about legacy, or is it about money? Or is it about a combination of the both? And do these fights, do they add cultural impact? Because when you've made a significant amount of money, the currency of legacy and the currency of culture, or the currency of cultural impact, becomes extremely important.